Hello and welcome to a video that's going to be slightly different from what I would normally do. Normally, of course, I would cover the title that is being displayed by the video footage, but I would rather comment on the games in a specific series, or should I say several specific series. It was released by Strategic Simulations Inc or SSI amongst friends for the Commodore 64 and various other systems, of course. The main reason I'm using Gateway of the Savage Frontier as background footage is the fact that it was the final game that was released for the Commodore 64 of that type of games, and also because I find it a bit dumb, but I will return to that later on. The idea of computer-based role-playing games wasn't exactly a new idea by the time of the release of these games. Games like Ultima and Bard's Tale were years ahead in that regard, but Strategic Simulations Inc. had a distinct uniqueness because, of course, they were officially licensed products based around Dungeons and Dragons, the second edition, back in the time when it was called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And they had two main series, the Dragonland series and the Forgotten Realms series. By and large, the Forgotten Realms series was considered to be the more popular amongst players, but personally I've always preferred the Dragonlands. But what do I know? Something that was distinct for these particular games was the fact that they were released in gold-colored boxes, hence the phrase gold box games. And of course, they had their programs on various different floppies of various different kinds. The written material consisted of two booklets, a rule book which explained how you played the game and various different concepts concerning Dungeons and Dragons and character creation and all that good stuff. It's something you could probably do without, especially if you had any prior knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons. But the second booklet in the various different game boxes was much more interesting because it was a journal entry booklet. The journal entry booklet served two purposes, partially to enhance the story and plot and that kind of stuff, but predominantly to discourage piracy by having important clues and things like that included in various different journal entries. Basically, the whole story and or plot of the game was basically written out in a continuous story that was then chopped up into small pieces where certain bits were left in the game, but most of it was put into various different paragraphs that the game would refer you to at various different points. Not entirely impossible to play the games without having access to the journal entries, but you would only get about a third out of the plot unless you could put the pieces together by yourself. The journal was written in such a way that it contained fake paragraphs, so if you decided to read through the journal entries, you would be fed potentially wrong information or a wrong impression of NPC of whatever kind. So the general encouragement was only to read the paragraphs that the game actually pointed out for you to read. An interesting concept, but as far as I can gather at least, Quite a few players found it rather annoying having to refer to a booklet in order to read a 5-line paragraph in order to continue playing the game they were busy playing. While the quality of the graphics varied from game to game, the general graphics were between serviceable and good. The world was displayed in a 3D kind of pseudo thing, with you moving around in various different areas, such as cities or jungles or ruins or whatever it was you might have been traversing. And it was perfectly acceptable and worked to give you an idea of where you were going. Combat was resolved in a tactical setting where you had a bunch of icons depicting your characters and a bunch of icons depicting the enemy characters, and then you had various different commands you could give in order to move your characters around or aim your bows or cast your spells or whatever. And at the end of a fight, whoever had icons left on their side was the winner. And hopefully, of course, it was the player in all cases. Due to the simplicity of the icon-based system, the combat was graphically not particularly impressive, but again, it worked. Sound design, sound effects by and large are just informative and nothing else, nothing overly exciting. The occasional death rattle from an enemy or the rumble sound of a fireball or whatever it might have been. The musical quality between the games was all over the place. You had something that was quite decent and something that was rather not decent, depending on the title that was released. I mentioned that SSI had two main series running. The Forgotten Realms series, which consisted of Pool of Aliens, Curse of the Asia Bonds, and Secret of the Silver Blades. For other systems than the Commodore 64, a fourth title was released called Pools of Darkness, which basically let the plot come full circle. Why that was never released for the Commodore 64, I have no idea, but it felt a bit arsey that it wasn't released for the Commodore 64, specifically because Secret of the Silver Blades more or less indicated that a fourth chapter would be coming. I suppose it's too much effort to print individual booklets for individual computer systems, so they unfortunately dropped that kind of information into the Commodore 64 game boxes as well. The Dragonland series consists of Champions of Krynn, Death Knights of Krynn, and of course Dark Queen of Krynn, which was also a title that was never released for the Commodore 64. Personally, I don't think that's a particularly big loss, because while it was easily, at least on the Amiga, the best quality of those kind of games released by SSI, the game was basically begging you to buy clue books, because the plot was so convoluted and so screwed around that without a clue book you would not get anywhere. In the middle of all that non-release of game chapters for the Commodore 64, SSI decided in their infinite wisdom to release a new Forgotten Realms series, which is where Gateway to the Savage Frontier comes in. The foundation was the same, but it featured some gimmicky things like interaction between player characters and NPCs, and reinforcements and that kind of stuff. But a second chapter was released for other systems than the Commodore 64. So yet again, the Commodore 64 users were rather screwed by SSI, to be honest. everyone else was screwed when it comes to a third chapter because one was never made for any other system, which, all things considered, might have been for the better. I'm definitely at a point in my life where I have outgrown the desire to play these kind of games. But from a game historical point of view, I suppose they are of some interest, especially if you're into Dungeons and Dragons in general. Hope you found this video somewhat interesting, and thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye for now.